A simple young man is kicked out of an elite resort, humiliated and condemned for his modest appearance and skin color. But the arrogant manager has no idea that in just 2 hours, a private helicopter will arrive with the young man's billionaire father, and their perfect plan for revenge is already beginning to unfold. Daniel Harris stepped onto the polished floor of the Azure Bay Resort. His simple gray shirt and worn sneakers contrasted sharply with the sparkling chandeliers and luxurious marble interior. He adjusted his hair and quietly watched the other guests showing off their designer clothes and sparkling jewelry. After a 30-minute drive from the nearest youth center, where he had spent the morning helping to organize a charity event, Daniel arrived at the resort to oversee the final preparations for the evening fundraiser. He preferred to do everything himself, just like in the days when he helped his father launch community projects in the basement of an old church. "I'm here to check on the preparations for the charity gala," he said politely to the administrator, whose professional smile faded when her gaze fell on his modest clothes and dark skin. "Are you helping one of our guests?" the young woman asked quietly. Daniel smiled calmly. "No, I'm here for the Harris Foundation Gala. My name is Daniel Harris." The administrator tapped nervously on the keyboard, frowning. "I don't see your name on the list. Are you working at this event?" "Actually, I'm one of the co-founders," Daniel replied evenly. "My father, Christopher Harris, was supposed to call ahead. He'll be arriving shortly on a private jet." Before the woman could respond, an elegantly dressed man in an expensive suit approached them, his shoes clicking loudly on the floor. His gold badge gleamed with the inscription, "Thomas Weller, CEO." "Is something wrong?" Thomas asked, forcing himself to smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. The administrator leaned over and whispered something to him. Thomas raised his eyebrows slightly and slowly looked Daniel up and down. "Sir, this is a private resort," he said sharply and condescendingly. "The Harris Foundation Gala is an exclusive event. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Daniel insisted. "I am Daniel Harris. My father and I." Thomas laughed briefly, cutting him off. "I'm very sorry, but Christopher Harris is a respected philanthropist. His son would not come alone, dressed like that." He pointed vaguely, almost with disgust, at Daniel's simple clothes. "I have ID," Daniel said, reaching for his backpack. Thomas waved him off. "These days, anyone can print a fake ID." In response to a barely audible signal behind Daniel, 2 security guards appeared. Nearby, guests began whispering and glancing in their direction, their expressions ranging from surprise to indignation. "Please don't make this difficult," Thomas said, barely concealing the contempt in his voice. "We have rules we have to follow. We can't allow people to just walk around here pretending to be important guests." Out of the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed a woman in a snow-white jacket who was discreetly filming everything on her phone. Great. This news would spread quickly. "I understand," Daniel said in an even voice. "Can I at least use the restroom before I leave?" Thomas hesitated, clearly weighing whether it would cause additional problems. "Hurry up," he finally said. As Daniel walked to the restroom, he heard Thomas mutter to the security guards, "Keep an eye on him. People like him are unpredictable." In the luxurious marble bathroom, Daniel locked himself in the stall and took out his phone. There was no one around. He typed a short message to Rebecca Lane, his father's chief of staff. Code Phoenix. Azure Bay Resort. Hours. A few seconds later, the reply came. Understood. Daniel smiled slightly and put his phone back in his pocket. He and his father had developed this system after numerous similar incidents where appearances had led to false assumptions. They preferred to let situations develop naturally. That way, the lessons were better remembered. When he stepped outside, 2 security guards with their arms crossed were waiting for him. "Sir, or whoever you are," the taller one asked contemptuously, "Mr. Weller has asked us to escort you off the hotel premises immediately." "Of course," Daniel replied quietly. As they walked through the luxurious lobby, Thomas emerged from behind the reception desk and looked at them with a smug expression. The guests turned and whispered to each other as they watched Daniel being escorted out of the hotel, just as Thomas had wanted. A poor, unfortunate young man in a plain shirt, being escorted out by security guards. "Maybe next time you'll book a room under your real name," Thomas Weller called after him, loud enough for everyone in the luxurious lobby to hear. "We are hosting the Harris Foundation Gala only because Mr. Harris is our esteemed benefactor. His son is known for his impeccable behavior, which, as you can see, you cannot boast of." Several guests smirked, their laughter sharp and mocking. Daniel held his head high, refusing to respond as they approached the grand entrance. I will be sure to convey your hospitality to my father, he said quietly. Thomas smirked. Yes, I'm sure he'll be very impressed by your imagination, if you have any, like your supposed connection to the Harris family. At the ornate entrance, one of the guards pointed to a row of taxis. Would you like me to call you a taxi? He asked, implying that Daniel couldn't afford one. No, thank you, Daniel replied evenly. I'll find my own way. Stepping out into the warm coastal air, he heard Thomas's last words. And don't even think about trying to sneak into the evening reception. There will be photographers at all the entrances. The heavy doors closed behind him with a soft, expensive thud. Daniel walked slowly along the winding path, feeling the stares of the resort staff on him. When he reached the main road, he turned left and headed along the picturesque promenade bordering the beach. Finding a small cafe overlooking the harbor, he sat down at a table in the corner and ordered iced tea. It was the perfect place to observe. Glancing at his watch, a modest timepiece that had once belonged to his grandfather, Daniel calculated the time. 40 minutes to go. His phone rang. Rebecca, Christopher is furious. He'll be here in about an hour. The package will arrive in 20 minutes. Daniel smiled slightly as he sipped his tea and watched the seagulls soar above the sparkling water. He wasn't upset. He had faced far worse manifestations of prejudice, sometimes subtle, sometimes brutally obvious. Before his father's success, Daniel had worked odd jobs to pay for his textbooks. He had been judged, rejected, and ignored hundreds of times. Once, his father had offered to protect him from it all, to make sure everyone knew who Daniel was, but Daniel had refused. Those who judge by appearances, he said, deserve to be shocked when they learn the truth. Exactly 19 minutes later, an elegant black car pulled up to the cafe. The driver, a woman in a strict uniform, got out and scanned the terrace until her gaze settled on Daniel. Mr. Harris, she asked quietly as she approached his table. Yes, Annie. Thank you for coming so quickly, Daniel said, standing up. Annie placed a bag of clothes and a small suitcase next to his chair. Mississippi Lane said you needed this urgently. Is everything all right? Just got mistaken for a homeless person again because of the color of my skin, Daniel replied with a smile. It'll all be sorted out soon. Would you like something to drink? He offered. No, thank you, sir. I need to get back. Your father sounded rather determined when he called. Daniel laughed. Christopher Harris's courage in business was legendary, although he never showed it to his family or employees. See you soon, Annie, Daniel said warmly. After she left, Daniel gathered his bags and headed for the cafe's restroom. 15 minutes later, he emerged transformed. The plain gray shirt was gone. In its place was a cream-colored jacket, perfectly tailored pants, polished shoes, and the gold ring his great-grandfather had given him on his 18th birthday. He paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and stepped out onto the waterfront. Passing by expensive shops and restaurants on the ocean front, he immediately noticed a change. Whereas before he had been invisible or worse, suspicious and rejected, now people nodded respectfully and gave him polite glances. He glanced at his watch again. There wasn't much time left before his father arrived. It was time to move on to the next stage. He took out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Hello, Mr. Freddie? This is Daniel Harris. I'm fine, thank you. Listen, I need a small favor regarding tonight's gala. Fred Smith, owner of Azure Bay Resort and an old friend of Christopher Harris, answered warmly despite the time difference. He was currently traveling in Europe. Daniel carefully explained the situation, emphasizing that he didn't want Thomas to be fired. He simply wanted him to respect other people for their intelligence, not their status. Are you sure? Fred Smith asked. I can have him packing his bags in half an hour. No, there's no need for that, Daniel replied with an understanding smile in his voice. My father and I have something more important to discuss. Well, said Fred, laughing, you two have always been dramatic. Consider it settled. I'll call Thomas myself and prepare him for Mr. Harris's arrival. I won't mention you, of course. All right. Thanks, Fred, Daniel said and ended the call. He continued his walk along the shore, and the winding path eventually led him back to the private beach of the Azure Bay Resort. Everything was going according to plan. Soon he would not return to the resort as a young man who could be judged by his modest clothes and darker skin. He would return as Daniel Harris, co-founder of the Harris Foundation, ready to teach a lesson in humility to those who needed it most. Back at the Azure Bay Resort, Thomas Weller enjoyed his long-awaited afternoon rest. Having successfully gotten rid of the imposter who dared to claim he was related to the Harris family, He personally checked all the details of the preparations for the grand ballroom for the evening gala. Everything had to be perfect for the Real Christopher Harris and his distinguished guests. Mr. Weller, the voice of the ballroom manager, rang out over the intercom, interrupting his concentration as he adjusted the centerpiece. Your phone, first line. It's Mr. Fred. Thomas straightened up instantly. Fred Smith, billionaire and owner of the resort, never called directly. I'll go to my office, Thomas said quickly and crossed the shiny floor with confident steps. Sitting down at the polished oak desk, he gathered his thoughts before picking up the receiver. Mr. Smith, what a pleasant surprise, he said, trying to make his voice sound as cheerful as usual. Thomas, Fred's voice was cold and serious. I've just received some disturbing news. Christopher Harris's helicopter will be arriving at our helipad in half an hour. I want you to make sure everything is ready for his arrival. Thomas's chest swelled with pride. He had been entrusted with an important task. Of course, sir. We are fully prepared for the Harris's arrival and for tonight's gala. This time it's different, Fred said sharply. Christopher is arriving early and he's not happy. There's been a misunderstanding at the hotel today. Thomas felt his chest tighten. A misunderstanding? He repeated, the blood draining from his face. He didn't go into details, Fred continued, but he mentioned something about his son. I thought you knew what he was talking about. Thomas's head spun. The young man he had so smugly dismissed earlier, the one dressed in simple clothes with dark skin. Maybe he was telling the truth? Sir, earlier there was a young man who claimed to be connected with Mr. Harris, Thomas stammered. But he didn't look like the photos we have. He was dressed, very casually, not as we would expect from our distinguished guests. He looked like a street vagrant. There was a long, agonizing silence on the line. When Fred finally spoke, his tone was harsh. Thomas, have you ever met Daniel Harris in person? Well, no, Thomas admitted, wiping the sweat from his face. But we pride ourselves on our standards. Fred cut him off sharply. Christopher Harris values his privacy above all else. His son rarely appears on social media, avoids public attention, and doesn't like to show off. Their caution is their choice. Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the first real tremors of fear. But the photo in our system, he began. Most likely outdated. Fred interrupted him. Listen carefully, Thomas. Sovereign is a $50 million helicopter capable of hiding an entire resort. And it's heading straight for our hotel, with a very angry Christopher Harris on board. When Thomas hung up, his hands were shaking. He rushed to his computer and hurriedly pulled up all the photos of Christopher Harris he could find. The screen was filled with images of the legendary business magnate. But Daniel? The photos of Daniel were puzzling. In the few he could find, the young man was always partially hidden, stepping away from the camera, blending into the background at events. Looking closer, Thomas realized with a sinking feeling. The young man he had kicked out today looked like him. The same figure, the same sharp eyes, only without the designer clothes and well-groomed appearance he had foolishly counted on. Oh God, Thomas whispered, feeling panic rising in his chest. He called reception. Give me the latest information on Christopher Harris's helicopter. Immediately. A few minutes later, he was looking at the printout. This helicopter was one of the most recognizable in the world, and few could afford it. As far as he knew, the U.S. president had one. Built 3 years ago to Harris's specifications, the Sovereign was a masterpiece of engineering, a spacious cabin finished in hand-tan leather, a security system on par with that of a head of state, luxurious cabins for 8 passengers, and a crew of 4 specially selected pilots. The aircraft's flight report confirmed that the Sovereign was already approaching their private helipad. Thomas's heart was pounding as he called an emergency staff meeting right in the middle of the lobby. Listen carefully, he said sharply, addressing the assembled employees. Today, we may have made a serious mistake. The young man who introduced himself as Daniel Harris could have been Daniel Harris. A wave of whispering swept through the group. Some faces turned pale. Christopher Harris's helicopter will arrive shortly, Thomas continued in a hurried tone. We need to get ready immediately. Jen, contact the pilots. Jack, roll out the red carpet. Danny, champagne and snacks to the helipad, quickly. While the staff bustled about, Thomas hurried outside and squinted at the sky on the horizon. In the flickering distance, he could barely make out the silhouette of an approaching helicopter. Even from a distance, it looked majestic. The phone rang. It was the helicopter station dispatcher. Mister, you'd better come down here. The Sovereign has requested priority landing. Estimated time of arrival is 5 to 7 minutes. Thomas adjusted his tie and swallowed hard. Okay, he replied tensely. I'm on my way. His thoughts raced at the speed of light. He had to find the young man he had humiliated, Daniel Harris, and somehow, at any cost, make amends before facing his father, or risk seeing his entire career collapse in a matter of minutes. The helicopter approached with unmistakable grandeur. This machine, worth over $50 million and custom-built, dwarfed everything else on the landing pad. Its polished carbon fiber hull gleamed in the midday sun, instantly drawing the eye. Resort guests, staff, and even him. At the end of the platform, Thomas stood tensely, followed by a hastily assembled group of well-wishers. Champagne was chilling in shiny ice buckets. A red carpet was laid out on the helipad, flanked by flower arrangements brought from the ballroom. Everything had been done to please the Harrises. When the helicopter landed, Thomas involuntarily calculated the cost of the helicopter in his mind. It would be enough to buy the entire Azure Bay resort twice over. The man he was about to meet in a few minutes, Christopher Harris, could destroy him with a single phone call. The helicopter's ladder extended with a soft mechanical creak and smoothly descended onto the prepared landing pad. Thomas adjusted his collar, which had suddenly become tight. Christopher Harris stepped out of the helicopter, tall, imposing, with graying hair, calmly maintaining his balance in the wind blowing from the rotating blades. His white tailored suit barely moved, emphasizing the impeccable posture and cold confidence of a man accustomed to power. He exuded an effortless power that silenced the crowd with his mere presence. Thomas stepped forward, forcing himself to smile and extending his hand. Mr. Harris, welcome to Azure Bay. I'm Thomas Weller, CEO. It's a great honor. Christopher walked past him without looking. The employees exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered that something was wrong, very wrong. Mr. Harris, Thomas repeated, hurrying after the billionaire. About today. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Christopher stopped abruptly and turned to him with a piercing gaze. Misunderstanding? He repeated in a quiet, calm voice, but there was steel in it. You call humiliating my son and kicking him off the premises because he's black a misunderstanding? The whispers among the guests grew louder. Several guests who had seen Daniel being thrown out now stared with wide eyes, piecing together the facts. Sir, I can explain, Thomas stammered, his throat dry. I'm sure you can, Christopher replied coldly. But first. He turned and pointed to the helicopter. Standing at the exit of the helicopter was Daniel Harris, transformed. This was no longer the modestly dressed young man who had been condemned as a villain and driven away. Now he stood tall and confident in his suit, his posture radiating dignity and pride. All eyes were on him. And Thomas realized with a pang that the real lesson was just beginning. The sunlight reflected off Daniel's ring as he stepped away from the helicopter. The crowd instinctively parted to let him through. Those who had watched his humiliation now looked at him in stunned amazement. The young man they had considered a nobody had returned looking like royalty. Christopher Harris waited for his son, and together they approached him. Mr. Harris, Thomas stammered. I can't express how sorry I am. Daniel raised his hand, silencing him with his quiet, commanding tone. Mr. Weller, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the helipad. I believe we should prepare for the evening banquet. Perhaps we can continue this conversation inside. With this simple, restrained statement, Daniel regained control of the situation. No shouting, no public humiliation, just a calm, unquestionable assertion of his legal right. When Daniel and Christopher headed for the resort entrance, the crowd respectfully parted. Thomas, having no choice, followed them, feeling the weight of his mistake on his shoulders. Mr. Harris, Mr. Daniel, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I deeply regret how you were treated today. There is no excuse for my actions. Christopher remained cold and unyielding, but Daniel looked at Thomas intently and then said, You know, Mr. Weller, Daniel began, I grew up in a poor neighborhood in Texas. My father was a construction worker, and my mother worked 3 jobs to feed us and help her sick mother. I worked night shifts to pay for college. Thomas blinked, not understanding where this was going. My father and I built the Harris Foundation from the ground up, Daniel continued, starting with nothing but determination and a dream to create opportunities for kids who, like me, are too often judged by the color of their skin or the simplicity of their clothes, rather than their abilities. In a world where people are so often judged by their appearance or possessions, sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what you wear or what you have, but in who you are. Daniel's story reminds us that true class isn't about luxury or status. It's about dignity, compassion, and how you treat others, even when no one is watching. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about justice, click the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us of what really matters in life. And let us know where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you.